The morning air was warm and calm as the sun rose over the harbor. Birds flew low above the water, and the sound of gentle waves tapped against the wooden docks. Jonas Green stood alone, watching his three children prepare the family sailboat for their trip. It had been months since all three of them had been together like this. Lucas, the oldest, checked the sails and tightened ropes. Emma, always full of energy, packed the supplies with a smile. Nate, the youngest, adjusted the small flag at the back of the boat and looked back at his father with quiet eyes. They had planned this sailing trip for weeks. It was meant to be a short journey, just 2 weeks sailing along the coast, visiting old islands they had loved as kids. The boat had once belonged to their mother, who had passed away years before. Sailing was their way of remembering her and staying close to each other. Jonas had his doubts. He knew the ocean could be unpredictable, but the kids were careful and experienced. Lucas had been sailing since he was 12. Emma ran up to Jonas and gave him a quick hug. "Don't worry, Dad," she said with a laugh. "We'll be back before you even miss us." Jonas smiled, but something in his chest felt tight. He didn't want to stop them, but he couldn't shake the strange feeling in his gut. Maybe it was just the usual worry that came with being a parent. Still, he said nothing. He just nodded and helped them untie the boat from the dock. As the sailboat pulled away from the harbor, Jonas raised his hand to wave goodbye. The three siblings waved back, smiling, their faces full of excitement. He took a photo with his old camera, Lucas at the wheel, Emma beside him pointing toward the sea, and Nate sitting at the edge of the boat, feet dangling. The picture was clear and bright, a perfect moment frozen in time. The boat grew smaller as it sailed away, its white sail catching the wind. Jonas stayed there on the dock long after the boat had disappeared beyond the horizon. He looked out at the open sea, thinking about the summers they used to spend together, about the days when the family felt whole. The wind picked up slightly, rustling his shirt. It felt like a whisper, but he didn't know what it was trying to say. He finally turned to leave, telling himself they would be fine. They always were. He walked back to his truck slowly, the dock creaking under his feet. Before getting in, he looked back one more time, just in case. The water was quiet now. The harbor was still. That photo of the three siblings would sit on his mantle for years. At first, it would bring a smile. Later, it would bring something else, something heavier, because that was the last time he saw them. Days passed after the boat had sailed away, and Jonas thought of his children often. He knew they were probably having the time of their lives, exploring new places and soaking in the sun. Still, after the first week without any news, he began to feel the smallest hint of worry. The days grew longer, and the worry grew with them. At first, he told himself it was nothing. Maybe they had found a secluded island with no phone signal or had simply forgotten to check in. They were adults now, after all. They didn't need their father checking in on them every day. But as the second week came to an end and there was still no word, Jonas began to feel a heavy sense of unease. He tried calling their phones again and again, but every time the line went straight to voicemail. No one answered. He sent a few messages, each one more worried than the last, but there was no reply. The silence felt like a weight hanging over him, growing heavier with each passing hour. He could hardly sleep. His mind kept racing through every possible scenario. What if the boat had been caught in a storm? What if they had run into trouble on some faraway island? What if they needed help? On the 13th day, Jonas couldn't wait any longer. He called the Coast Guard. He was calm when he made the call, his voice steady as he explained the situation. They told him not to panic. They assured him that the ocean was big, and it wasn't uncommon for boats to get off course. "We'll send out a team to search," they promised. "We'll keep you updated." The search began the next day. Jonas watched as Coast Guard boats zipped across the water, their powerful engines cutting through the waves. Helicopters flew overhead, circling the coastline. Jonas stood at the harbor, his hands clenched in fists, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Hours passed, then days, but no sign of the boat, no sign of his children. He couldn't understand it. The ocean was vast, yes, but it wasn't endless. How could three people simply disappear? Surely someone must have seen something. Surely they would find something. Then, one morning, the Coast Guard called him with news. It wasn't good news, but it was something. They had found a piece of the boat, just a small part of the broken mast, washed up on a distant beach, miles away from where Jonas knew the boat had been. They couldn't explain how it had gotten there, but it confirmed his worst fear. The boat had been damaged, and whatever had happened to his children, it wasn't good. As the days dragged on, Jonas clung to a thin thread of hope. He refused to believe the worst, even though the evidence suggested it. He couldn't let go. He wouldn't. But deep inside, something shifted. The silence now felt like an answer he didn't want to hear. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Jonas could hardly remember what it felt like to live a normal life. Every morning, he woke up to the same feeling, a quiet ache in his heart, a sense that something was deeply wrong. He stopped answering the phone when friends or family called, unable to hear their voices without feeling overwhelmed. It had been a year since his children disappeared, and still there was no explanation, no sign of the boat, no clues. The silence had become a constant companion. Jonas became obsessed. He read every article, every piece of news that might have something to do with his children. He searched through online forums, hoping to find someone, anyone, who had seen something that might help. He would drive for hours along the coast, visiting every small port, asking fishermen if they had seen the boat or heard anything strange. His hair grew grayer, his face more lined with worry, but nothing changed. His life had narrowed down to one thing: finding his children. It wasn't just a matter of hope anymore. It was an obsession. He spent all this time looking, searching, investigating. Even when others told him to move on, to let it go, Jonas couldn't. He wouldn't. Friends and family started to worry about him. His sister Claire called him nearly every week, trying to get him to see a therapist or take a break. "You can't keep doing this," she would say, her voice filled with concern. "It's not healthy. They're gone, Jonas. You have to accept that." But Jonas couldn't accept it. The thought of giving up on finding them felt like admitting defeat, and he wouldn't give up on his children. He started visiting the Coast Guard office more frequently, hoping they had new information. Each time, they told him the same thing: no new leads, no new searches. The boat had vanished, and they were out of options. Jonas couldn't understand it. How could they just stop looking? How could they say that it was over? They were wrong. He knew they were wrong. It wasn't just the Coast Guard he sought out. He hired private investigators, hired sailors who knew the ocean better than anyone else. He gathered maps, studied the tides, and learned the language of the sea. He became a man driven by one thought: the truth. Jonas stopped caring about the rest of his life. He didn't care about the house anymore. He sold it. He didn't care about friends or work or the life he once knew. All that mattered was the search. Everything else felt small in comparison. But even as he pushed on, even as he ignored the worries of others, a small voice deep inside him whispered doubts. What if they were truly gone? What if, after all this time, he had been chasing shadows? The voice was quiet, but it was there. Still, Jonas refused to listen. He couldn't. The search had become everything. Without it, he didn't know who he was anymore. It was a quiet morning when Jonas first noticed the envelope. It was lying on the kitchen table, placed neatly in the center as if it had been waiting for him. There was no stamp, no return address, just his name written in careful handwriting. His heart skipped a beat as he stared at it. It had been years since he had received anything like this. For a moment, he wondered if it was just another piece of junk mail, a flyer for something useless, but deep down he knew it wasn't. This felt different. He reached for the envelope with trembling hands, his mind racing. Had someone found something? Was it from the Coast Guard, or maybe one of the private investigators he had hired in the past? His pulse quickened as he carefully tore open the top, afraid to rip it too quickly in case the contents were important. Inside, there was a single photo. It wasn't a high-quality image. In fact, it looked old, faded by time. 3 people stood on a beach, their faces blurred by the graininess of the photo. Jonas knew immediately who they were, even though their features weren't fully clear. Lucas, Emma, and Nate, his children. They were standing together, looking out at the horizon. In their hands, they held small wooden staffs, like something you would use for shelter or protection. It wasn't the kind of photo someone would take for fun. It felt like a survival picture, a message in disguise. Jonas stared at it, his breath caught in his throat. His children were alive. They had to be. There was no other explanation. The photo was proof. They had somehow survived all these years. But why had they not reached out to him? Why had they stayed silent for so long? On the back of the photo was a message, written in small, hurried letters. "We're safe. Don't stop looking." Jonas couldn't believe it. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he fought them back. This was not the time for tears. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment he knew he wasn't imagining things. They were out there, somewhere, and they needed him to find them. The words "don't stop looking" burned in his mind. He wouldn't stop. He couldn't. Not now. He took a deep breath and sat down at the table, still holding the photo in his hands. His mind raced with 1,000 questions. Where had the photo come from? Who had sent it? Why had they waited this long to reach out? But one thing was certain. His search wasn't over. This was a sign, a lifeline, a clue. The only clue he had ever received in all these years. Jonas stood up, a sense of purpose flooding through him like a surge of energy. He had a new direction now. He wasn't just waiting anymore. He was going to find them. As he walked out the door, the photo still clutched tightly in his hand. Jonas knew that this would be the beginning of the end of his search. He had to find that island. He had to find his children. And this time, he wasn't going to stop until he did. Jonas couldn't stop thinking about the photo. The words "don't stop looking" echoed in his mind like a whisper, pushing him forward. It was a small clue, but it was everything. He knew that if he was ever going to find his children, he needed to follow this trail wherever it led. But where to start? The photo showed a beach, but it wasn't clear where it had been taken. And then, as he stared at the photo one last time, Jonas remembered something. A name. Donnie Clark was a sailor who had spent years in the Southern Pacific. Jonas had heard stories about him, stories about his adventures on the ocean and the strange islands he had visited. Donnie was a man who knew the waters better than anyone else. He was the kind of sailor who wasn't afraid to go places where others dared not follow. And Jonas had to find him. If anyone could help him, it was Donnie. Jonas tracked down Donnie's cabin at a small, quiet marina on the edge of town. The old sailor was known for keeping to himself, rarely seen by anyone except the handful of people who worked at the docks. When Jonas knocked on the door, it creaked open slowly, and a voice from inside called out, "Who's there?" "My name is Jonas Green," Jonas replied. "I need your help. I've been looking for my children for years. I think they're alive, but I don't know where to look. I was hoping you could help me." Donnie paused for a long moment before he opened the door fully. He was an older man, his face weathered by time and the harsh sun, his eyes sharp despite his age. He looked Jonas up and down, sizing him up before stepping aside to let him in. "Come in," Donnie said gruffly, and Jonas stepped inside, taking in the clutter of maps, fishing gear, and worn-out sailing books that filled the room. Donnie sat down at a small table covered in papers and tools, his hands moving automatically as if he had done this 1,000 times before. "I've been to places," Donnie began, his voice rough but steady. "Places where no one else dares to go. You're looking for something that's been hidden away, maybe for good reason." "I don't care about reasons," Jonas said, his voice growing desperate. "I need to find them, my children. I've waited too long." Donnie eyed him carefully, then sighed. "There's an island out there," he said, leaning back in his chair. "It's not on any maps. It's a place people avoid. I've been there once, and that was enough. Strange things happen there, things that make people disappear. But if your kids are alive, if they're out there, then that's where they'll be." Jonas felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard rumors, whispers about islands no one could find, about places where the ocean seemed to swallow ships whole. But he couldn't turn back now. He wouldn't. "Take me there," Jonas said, his voice firm, even though his heart pounded with fear and excitement. Donnie looked at him for a long time before nodding. "I'll take you," he said finally. "But you need to know something. Once we leave, there's no turning back. The island doesn't give up its secrets easily." "I don't care," Jonas replied, his eyes burning with determination. "I'm going to find them." And so, with the promise of a new journey ahead, Jonas and Donnie prepared to set sail into the unknown, hoping that the photo, the message, and the long years of searching would finally lead to the truth. The journey was long, and Jonas felt the days slip by like the endless waves. The boat creaked with every roll of the ocean, its sails catching the wind as Donnie steered them toward the unknown. The farther they sailed, the emptier the sea became. It was as though they were leaving the world behind, crossing into a place that had been forgotten by time. Jonas stood at the edge of the boat, staring into the horizon. The water seemed to stretch on forever, and the sky above was an endless blue. The peacefulness of the ocean was deceptive. Deep down, he knew they were heading towards something dangerous, something that had haunted his thoughts for years. The island from the photo, the place his children had been taken to. How much longer? Jonas asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the growing tension in his chest. Donnie, who had been silent for most of the journey, glanced at him over his shoulder. "Another day or two," he answered, his voice low and serious. "We're getting close." The air around them shifted as they sailed deeper into unfamiliar waters. The wind seemed to change direction, and the ocean took on a different quality, darker, rougher, as though it had its own secrets. Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them out there, hidden beneath the surface. On the third evening, just as the sun began to set, Donnie slowed the boat. The horizon had begun to change, and Jonas could see something ahead. A shadow on the water, a shape emerging from the distance. The island. It was smaller than he had imagined, but as they drew closer, it looked nothing like any of the islands he had seen before. Jagged cliffs rose from the water, and the trees on the shore seemed to bend unnaturally, as if they were being twisted by an unseen force. "This is it," Donnie said, his voice soft but serious. "Keep your eyes open. Things don't always make sense on that island." Jonas didn't respond. His heart was racing, his mind spinning with questions. What had happened to his children? Why had they been left on this strange island? And why hadn't they reached out until now? He had so many questions, but no answers. All he knew was that he had to find them. As Donnie guided the boat closer to the shore, Jonas felt a chill in the air, despite the warmth of the setting sun. The island felt wrong somehow. It wasn't just the unusual shape of the trees or the strange stillness of the water. It was as if the island itself was watching them, waiting for them to arrive. Jonas could feel his skin crawl, but he forced himself to stay focused. The boat scraped against the rocky shore, and Donnie quickly tied it to a nearby tree. The moment they stepped onto the beach, Jonas felt the weight of the place press down on him. The sand beneath his feet felt different, darker, heavier, like it had seen years of forgotten history. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the rocks. "Stay close," Donnie muttered, leading the way up a narrow path that cut through the trees. Jonas followed, his mind racing, every step bringing him closer to the truth. But as they walked deeper into the island, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that something was not quite right. Something was waiting for him, and for his children, on this forgotten island. The deeper Jonas and Donnie walked into the island, the stranger it became. The air grew thick with an almost oppressive silence. The trees, twisted and gnarled, seemed to watch them as they moved. The path was narrow, almost hidden, as if it had been forgotten by time. Jonas could feel the weight of the place pressing down on him, and the further they ventured, the more uneasy he became. It wasn't just the isolation. It was something about the island itself, something ancient, something that didn't want them there. Donnie, who had remained quiet for most of the walk, finally spoke. "We're getting close now," he said in a low voice. "There's a place here, hidden deep in the forest. It's where people disappear, where things change." Jonas swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you mean? What happens to them?" Donnie glanced back at him, his face serious. "No one knows for sure. All I know is, when you come here, you're never the same. And you don't leave the same way you came." The words made Jonas feel a chill run down his spine, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. He had come this far, and nothing would stop him now. Not fear, not the strange feeling in the air, not even Donnie's warning. His children were out there. He had to find them. They came to a clearing, and there, in the middle of it, stood a strange structure. It wasn't a building in the traditional sense. It was more like a large, weathered stone circle, with tall stones standing upright in a perfect ring. Vines wrapped around the stones and moss covered most of the surface. Jonas stopped in his tracks, staring at it. There was something unsettling about the place. It felt ancient, as if it had been standing there for centuries, long before anyone had ever stepped foot on the island. Donnie stopped beside him and looked at the structure. "This is the place," he said quietly. "It's where things get twisted. People come here, and they never come back the same. I don't know why, but I've seen it happen. You'll understand soon enough." Jonas stepped forward, his heart racing. He wanted to ask more questions, but the words got caught in his throat. There was a pull, an undeniable force drawing him toward the center of the stone circle. His mind told him to turn back, to leave the island and never look back. But his heart, his desperate need to find his children, kept him moving. As Jonas stepped into the circle, a strange sensation washed over him. The air seemed to hum with energy, and for a brief moment, everything around him grew still. He looked up at the stones, their shadows stretching long across the ground as the sun began to dip below the horizon. Everything felt wrong, yet somehow right at the same time. Suddenly, a soft sound broke the silence. A voice. It was faint at first, almost a whisper on the wind, but it grew louder. "Dad," the voice called. It was his daughter's voice. "Emma." Jonas's heart leaped in his chest. "Emma," he shouted, his voice trembling. He spun around, searching the clearing, but there was no one there. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Dad, help us." Jonas took a step forward, but Donnie grabbed his arm, holding him back. "Don't," Donnie warned, his voice tight with fear. "It's a trick. Don't listen to it." But Jonas couldn't stop himself. He had heard his daughter's voice, and nothing, not even Donnie's warnings, could stop him now. He pushed past Donnie and rushed toward the center of the circle, determined to find his children. Jonas felt his heart race as he stepped deeper into the stone circle. The air around him seemed to shift, becoming heavy, like a storm was about to break. The voice calling his name, soft and pleading, continued to echo in his mind. "Dad, help us." He couldn't ignore it. It was his children. It had to be. There was no way he could turn back now. They were close, closer than ever. As he moved further into the circle, he noticed the sky above had darkened. The sun had set, and the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. But something was wrong with the stars. They seemed too bright, almost unnatural, as if they were shining just for him. The air felt electric, charged with something he couldn't understand. He stopped in the center of the stone circle, breathing heavily, his eyes scanning the surrounding forest. Everything was still, too still. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the distant trees, but it felt like something else was watching him. Jonas could feel the weight of the island's secret pressing down on him. "Emma," he called out, his voice shaking. "Lucas, Nate." His words seemed to disappear into the thick air, swallowed by the quiet. But then, just as he thought he was losing his mind, he heard it again, a whisper, soft but unmistakable, right behind him. "Dad, we're here." He turned around quickly, his heart pounding. Standing just outside the circle were his children, Lucas, Emma, and Nate. They looked almost the same as when he had last seen them, but their eyes were different. Their expressions were hollow, as if something was missing. They stared at him, but there was no warmth in their gaze, just an empty, distant look that made Jonas freeze in place. "Emma," he said, his voice breaking. He reached out toward them, but they didn't move. "You shouldn't have come," Lucas said, his voice distant, as if it wasn't really him speaking. "We've been waiting, but you shouldn't have come." Jonas's heart twisted with confusion. "What do you mean? I've been searching for you for years. I've never stopped looking. Why did you come home? Why did you reach out?" Nate stepped forward, his face pale. "We can't leave. Not anymore. This place, it changes you. It changes everything." "What is this place?" Jonas asked, his voice desperate. He could barely hold himself together now, the pieces of the mystery starting to fall into place. "What happened to you? Why did you disappear?" The children looked at each other, and then Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "This island, it pulls you in. It feeds on you. Once you're here, you can't leave. We didn't choose this. We didn't want it, but we had no choice. Jonas felt a cold wave wash over him as he realized the truth. His children hadn't been lost in the sea. They hadn't been taken by a storm. The island itself had claimed them. It had trapped them, twisted them into something else, something not entirely human anymore. You're not the same, Jonas whispered, his voice cracking with the pain of the truth. Lucas nodded slowly, his face empty. No, we're not. And now, neither will you be. You came for us, but this island will take you too. Before Jonas could say another word, the ground beneath him trembled, and the sky above flickered. The stone circle began to glow with an eerie light, and the children's faces twisted into expressions of fear, or perhaps pity. It's too late, Emma said, her voice full of sadness. We're all trapped here now. Jonas took a step back, his mind spinning. He had come for his children, but now he realized the island had been the true force behind their disappearance. It wasn't a place of survival. It was a prison, a place that took whatever it wanted and never let go. As the glow from the stones grew brighter, Jonas understood. The island had shown him the truth, but it had also marked the beginning of his own disappearance. He had come for answers, but the island's secret had come at a great cost. Now he too would become part of its forgotten history.